Good morning, everyone. So the first topic we want to speak about today is the inspection addendum, how that's become more restricted, and how that has inevitably created some heartburn with our current transactions. So our old inspection addendum, if you remember, had a much broader scope of allowable repair requests for the buyer. This new one has been tightened down because the old one was creating its own category of issues. The old inspection addendum used to allow for a 2-day termination period for the buyer if the buyer and the seller could not come to an agreement on what the repairs should be. Now, unfortunately, that was a very easy out for a buyer who may have gotten cold feet, or a buyer who had found another house they liked better. And what could happen is the buyer would write up every conceivable possible thing that could be construed as a defect, because the definition of defect was very broad, in order to force the hand of the seller, who would then feel the need to issue a repair remediation limit credit in lieu of repairs, because they couldn't possibly regrade the entire yard to prevent water intrusion into a basement, right? So the buyer and the seller would just go back and forth arguing about the repairs until the seller response time expired. And then the buyer would have a 2-day right of termination. So that's how a lot of our transactions fell apart. So the board of directors supported the Standard Forms Committee's move to tighten down what the scope of repairs is. Now, I hear a lot of agents who say, just make it XYZ and leave it at that. Well, the problem is and Standard Forms Committee will tell you this, we're always walking that fine line of representing our buyers and sellers. So we have to serve the general public. And if we decide to get bossy about what is allowed in legally binding real estate contracts, we may be restricting the choice of our customers and our clients. So that's why we always try to find some sort of acceptable middle ground where the buyer feels whole when they close on the property and the seller does not feel taken advantage of. However, if you've been in this for some time, you'll understand that that inspection addendum has waffled back and forth on that pendulum as to what is the acceptable middle ground. So I think the last inspection addendum was a little too broad. We had people asking for yards to be regraded and waterproofing systems to be installed in basements, and pretty much a lot of cosmetic items were slipping in there as defects. And the buyer knew they could because they had that leverage of being able to terminate if the seller didn't acquiesce. So this new one, I feel, is possibly too restrictive because, or I wouldn't say it's too restrictive, but what I would say is it definitely has some gray areas where we are left to interpret maybe a crack in vinyl siding. Is that a defect or is that cosmetic? Well, it depends. It depends on if water intrusion can take place, and more importantly, if water intrusion has taken place. So Kathy Baker, if you don't mind me using you as an example, Kathy, she received a repair request item that was to change the slope of the brick windowsill on the exterior of a house because the pitch was pitched inward. So conceivably, well, theoretically, water could roll back along that brick facade and pool at the base of the exterior window, causing rot, causing water intrusion, causing a degradation of that window jamb. However, what I counseled Kathy on is it isn't doing that. It's a house that's over 50 years old, and the home inspector did not find any water intrusion or any rot. So I would argue that the slope of that brick facade could pose a problem, but after 50 years, it has not posed a problem. So it is not in and of itself a defect. Same thing with the existence of Romex wire or knob and tube or polybutylene pipes. Are those everyone's favorite? No. Did we get away from using those materials? We definitely did. But if they're not causing an issue now, they're not a defect. The mere existence of them does not dictate that they are, by definition, a defect. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The problem now is that our current inspection addendum does not have a termination period. So Kathy's in one right now where the buyers have asked for the sun and the stars and everything. And the seller is saying, you know, that's not fair. You know, a lot of those items aren't defects. We should not be obligated to fix those. So you find yourself at a standstill where the buyer isn't satisfied, the seller isn't satisfied, and where do you go from there? So it's a little gray now as to how that transaction ends. And I almost was in one as well. Fortunately, my sellers finally just threw some money at the problem, and now we're closing. But we had a really hard time with our repair request because, you know, one of the items was that the hot water heaters were beyond their average lifespan. That is not a defect. I know, I saw your face, Stevie. That is the same face I made, which was, again, like me, just because I'm old doesn't mean I'm defective. I could be, but I'm currently not. So we don't have an obligation to credit any money for hot water heaters or to replace hot water heaters if they are not currently defective. Jennifer, did we have a chat?
We do. Carla's asking about the aluminum wiring.
Oh yes, that's more commonly called Romex wiring. So this is one of my heartburn items on the new inspection addendum. Romex wiring is, and can you let Jamie in, Jennifer? Thank you. Romex wiring is one of those items that we have that they are no longer installing. It is not something that people want in their homes. However, the fact that it exists does not make it a defect. So the Residential Property Disclosure Act makes it very clear what are the items that the seller is obligated to disclose. Aluminum wiring, Romex wiring, is not one of those items. Chinese drywall is, wetlands is, there's a lead-based paint, obviously, or we wouldn't have that form we have to, you know, fiddle around with every transaction. But the aluminum wiring is not one of the items that must be disclosed, and it is not in and of itself a defect. Do we have a follow-up question, Jennifer?
Asbestos siding.
Yep, that one is also in and of itself not a defect. Now, if it is friable, meaning it's crumbling and getting into the air, then conceivably you could make an argument that that is now failing. But I'll tell you, Kathy Baker just had one where the asbestos siding on the garage, poor Kathy, I'm going to start using a fake name for you. So Emma had one this week that the garage had asbestos siding on it, and the bottom of the asbestos siding had some broken out pieces on it. Well, it was obvious that perhaps a lawnmower bumped up against it and cracked off some pieces, or the weed eater, or it was not that the asbestos siding was failing, but it can be broken. So the fact that it had some chips and pieces out of it did not make it a defect, in my opinion, because that was not an ongoing problem where asbestos fibers were getting into the air. Had it been the case where it was naturally crumbling apart and that was an ongoing issue, then I would say that that was a defect. But again, remember, this is all going to depend on which hat you're wearing. Are you the listing agent or are you the buyer's agent? Who are you trying to protect? And that's where there are not cut and dry answers for any of these items, except for the ones that are very clearly defective, like the roof has leaks. And I had just had one this week. One of the items on my difficult one I got was that the copper roofing, because there's copper roofing on this house, the copper roofing had a spot that was bent up, and they were saying it could cause water intrusion, and they wanted a roofer to fix that. Well, it was not causing water intrusion. The home inspector reported that it had not had any water intrusion. So our argument was it is still functioning properly. That, for me, would fall into a cosmetic category. But again, if that's my buyer, I'm probably asking for it, because now I interpret that as a future problem. But future problems are not current problems. Does that answer your question, Carla?
Yes. Thank you.
Great. And I know this is a very difficult subject because it's not how we did things 6 months ago, you know?
I did sell a house with the aluminum wiring, and they closed. We were the buyers, and they chose to close. So they did a lot of research, talked to an electrician. He told them some things to consider and some maintenance things to do on a regular basis, like make sure your electrical outlets are tight, that the screws are tightened down really good, because that's when, you know, you have issues, is when things come loose in there.
Oh,
so they decided to close. Yep.
Well, another big one that comes up is ungrounded 3-pronged outlets. So the Roanoke Valley is full of old houses that have ungrounded outlets because that wiring has not been upgraded. But you know, everybody has put 3-prong outlets on those outlets so that they don't have to have adapters for all of their plugs. Well, that's how I lost a refrigerator. You know, at my old house, we had a 3-prong outlet there. I assumed it was grounded, plugged in a new Samsung refrigerator, and the motherboard blew. And it was our fault. Fortunately, the warranty guy who came out just said, hey, just don't tell anybody that, and I'm just going to pretend like it was the motherboard, which was very sweet because that refrigerator was like 6 months old. But he did say, make sure this outlet is grounded when I get back with this new motherboard, which we did. But I have handled that several different ways. I sometimes see in the private remarks that all ungrounded outlets are conveying as is. I have had a client myself who is a seller, and I've advised them to have an electrician come in and swap all those back to 2-prong outlets, because the problem with putting a 3-prong outlet on an ungrounded outlet is that potentially they could have an argument, the buyer could have an argument that that's fraud, right? That you have led them to believe you have grounded outlets because you have 3-prong outlets on there. So this is an issue that I see come up often because people want to plug in their computers and their televisions, and they don't want to worry about loss. So I don't know the solution to that. I think as we go on and as it keeps coming up on repair requests, I think we're going to start seeing it more and more often written into the private remarks. I think more and more the private remarks are going to be things like fireplace conveys an as-is condition. All outlets convey an as-is condition. You know, I just think we're going to start seeing more of that. And it's going to be about educating buyers that older homes have these issues. Doesn't mean necessarily they're safety issues. They're just common old house issues. Do we have another question, Jennifer?
We do. Kara is asking about the asbestos siding. Does it get called by the appraiser?
That I don't know. I'll say this. I have never seen it called by the appraiser. I've never seen that happen. And if we've got a couple of appraisers at the company who are also real estate agents, I certainly could find out. But not. I just
phoned a friend, so we'll see what she says.
Yay! That's right. Jennifer has a best friend who's an appraiser, which seriously comes in handy for her.
Yeah.
Okay, so does anybody have any more questions on that topic? And I know I didn't give you any good advice, but I did at least tell you what to expect. Anybody have any more questions? Yes, Kathy. You may need to unmute, Kathy.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. How did you get to the point where they asked for certain things on your inspection addendum and you said no, but we'll give you some money?
Oh, Lord, Kathy, let me just tell you.
I don't know how you get from that point to
Well, do you want to know the real answer? I also threw money at the situation. So this is, I will use everything anonymously here, but these are some sellers of mine who are quite difficult. They are, let me just give you the story. This is in the range of a $500,000 house. We received a full price offer and a $1,000 repair remediation limit. We obviously accepted that, thankfully. And then when the inspections were completed, the buyer, this is very odd, the buyers decided to write us a 4-page letter sharing with us their concerns about the property in lieu of a repair request. I've never had that happen. It was bizarre. And they were asking for things like a $1,500 credit because the 2 hot water heaters were beyond their average lifespan. Well, they're functioning perfectly fine. And a lot of items like that. They wanted us to, basically, if you've been doing this as long as I have, I immediately thought, oh, they have cold feet. They're prepping to exit the contract, right? They're going to heavy load that repair request so that it seems financially catastrophic to us, and we're going to go ahead and issue a repair remediation limit, and they're going to be able to walk. That's what I figured would happen. Turns out, no, they really wanted the house, but they wanted these 4 pages of repairs done. So what happened was my seller said lots of words and then said, the repair remediation limit, that's it. But we need to know by tomorrow because we need to get this house back on the market. So I threw in a $600 home warranty program to go with that $1,000, just hoping and praying, things like the hot water heater, the HVAC system is older. I was hoping the home warranty program might persuade them that would take care of some of those items. It did not. They came back and said, absolutely not. We want $8,500 or we're not closing. Now, we sold this $500,000 house for full price. I mean, it was $495,000, but we sold it for full price. So $8,500 is not an obscene negotiation amount. However, it was to my sellers. So my sellers hit the roof and were just flabbergasted that they thought they wanted $8,500. So at the end of the day, we came to terms with and again, like a parent, do as I say, don't do as I do, okay? But at the end of the day, my sellers pitched in $4,500 and I pitched in $4,000, which is unbelievable. But I'll tell you the reason why I did it. Number one, I work for a company where I can afford to do that, which is nice. Number two, I would have to find them, obviously, another buyer during COVID-19 who only wants to negotiate $1,000 or less on their house. So for me, and it closes in 3 weeks. So for me, that was worth the sacrifice. Now, would I maybe have made that monetary concession on a $100,000 house? Well, I couldn't have, right? So I had the luxury of being able to do that this time. My sweet husband, who's a teacher, when I told him, he said, what? He said, but that's the little bit of money you were going to give me for summer because he doesn't get a paycheck in the summer. And I was like, yeah, sorry. Guess you're packing lunches all summer. So, we've all done it. We'll all do it at some point. And y'all all know what I'm talking about. It's just, I wish that weren't the case. I wish my money weren't part of the negotiations. But in this case, we would have been back on the market and I would have had angry sellers to contend with. Not angry at me, but just they would have taken it out on the next buyer probably, who in their right mind would like to negotiate on this house. Plus, I also would have a house back on the market after 2 weeks, right? And in this market, that can be a little stigmatizing. So.
Okay, I've got the answer about the appraiser, and she said only if it's cracked and broken really bad is the only reason she'll call out asbestos siding. So.
Great.
That's just one opinion, though.
But it's an appraiser opinion, so that matters. Okay, who is ready? Also I realized this is going on YouTube. So Jennifer, I'm going to need you to learn how to edit some stuff and take that little bit about my clients out. Thank you very much. So let's move on to the new laws if you guys are ready. And I emailed you the agenda today, and it's got some highlights there of the ones I'd like to talk about because they're the ones I think that will impact us the most in our industry. So the first one is we're having some Virginia fair housing law changes. So with fair housing, nothing ever goes away. We just add more things. And you'll remember from class, there's the federal fair housing law and what all the protected classes are. I've been out of class too long, so I won't be able to rattle it off like I used to be able to. But Virginia has always had elderliness as well, which is an additional fair housing classification that is specific to Virginia. Well, Virginia is going ahead and adding some more protected classes, and those are going to be disability, source of funds, and I'll go into that one, sexual orientation, gender identity, and status as a veteran. So that is a large addition to Virginia's Fair Housing Act. So it will now include race, color, religion, national origin, sex, elderliness, familial status, disability, source of funds, sexual orientation, gender identity, and status as a veteran. So the only one that I wanted to read up more on was source of funds. And, you know, what that's going to look like is, and again, these apply to landlords who own 5 or more properties or have an ownership interest in 5 or more properties. So for someone like me, I own 1 rental property. That's all. So I actually can pick and choose who I want to rent to. Does anybody remember what that rule was called? It was the Mrs. Something rule. What was it? Y'all have been out of class way shorter period of time than me. I at least remember the Mrs. It's the Mrs. So-and-so rule, where if she owns her own property, she can pick and choose who she wants to rent to. So this is going to apply to folks who have an ownership interest in 5 or more properties. So the source of funds one, it looks like now landlords who own 5 or more properties cannot say, sorry, I don't rent to Section 8, right? They're not allowed now to say, what are the source of funds for you making your payment? And then make a decision based on that. Now, they can still have lots of other qualifying eligibility questions that their tenants must follow. But what they teach you about property management and about leasing is that should be strictly to every single tenant. If you have a filter search set up for your tenants, it needs to be exactly the same for every single tenant applicant. And status as a veteran. In the past, that was not a protected class. So people, I don't know why people would, but people could choose not to rent to veterans. They could, I mean, mostly these impact rentals, you know, mostly in the sales, in the residential sales like we do. We don't see a lot of picking and choosing about who they're going to sell their house to. But now we have all these other protected classes. So that is Virginia. Now, the one that's going to affect all of us is cell phones while driving. We knew it was coming. I can't believe it's taken this long. But as of January 1st, that's it for having your phone on your ear. You're going to have to use a hands-free device in your car. There are some exceptions, but you have to be calling in an emergency, right? So if you're seeing a car accident happening, then you're going to have to be able to prove you saw a car accident happening when you're calling in that emergency when you're on your phone. Otherwise, you're going to have to be using hands-free. It's a $125 fine. And if you're in a work zone, it's a $250 fine. I assume, they didn't say this, but I assume this means that they now can pull you over just for that. In the past, in some states, they have to pull you over for something else, and then that can be added on. But the way this one is written, I'm assuming since it is it will be illegal January 1st, they can pull you over just for being on your phone while driving. Okay? All right, worker misclassification. I sure wish my teams were on here because this is going to affect them. So it makes it very clear now that if you have someone working for you, transaction coordinators, assistants, and others who may be doing tasks for you for money, then it is assumed that they are an employee. That means matching FICA, Social Security, matching all of that. It means providing them a W-2. And if you're not treating them as an employee, they have a right to sue you. So this has always been sort of a little wishy-washy area here. And the Virginia Association of Realtors has always warned brokers that we really need to make sure that if our agents are using a transaction coordinator or an assistant, those folks need to have an LLC. They need to have a business set up where you are paying their business. So it's as simple as those folks, there are transaction coordinators and they have an LLC set up. And so they are a vendor and they are classified as an independent contractor with the IRS, which would allow you to be able to use them. What this does not allow is for you to just hire somebody you know who wants to function as your assistant, right? They are an employee now to you. And unfortunately, that falls back on me because I control you and your behavior. And if you're doing something like treating a employee like an independent contractor, then that can come down on both of us. So please, if you're going to use an assistant, please make sure you're doing it the right way. And if you have questions about that, call me and we'll figure it out together. There are a lot of transaction coordinators in the Valley, but think about it this way. And the one that they don't even mention on here are photographers. So if you're hiring a photographer who does not have a business name or is not set up with the IRS as an independent contractor, conceivably they're now your employee. So we're going to want to start asking our vendors who we ask to do things, if they have an LLC, do they have a business name? Are they registered with the State Corporation Commission? Those are questions we're going to need to ask. And unfortunately, that's really going to pinch those folks who are just kind of doing it on the side as a side job. Questions about that? No? All right. Moving on. I'm thrilled about this next one. And that is the POA and Condo Act disclosure statement. They are actually, so you may not know this, but by law, that POA 3-day right of rescission period, you may not extend it. Buyers and sellers, even if they agree to extend it, it is against the law to extend it currently. So that 3-day right of rescission is what it is, regardless of situation. It's not even business days. So if you get the POA packet on a Friday night, by Monday night, your buyers better know they still want to buy the property or not and have had time to look through that POA packet, because that is their last time to be able to rescind their contract and terminate. So what's going to change, and these changes are not in effect yet, they usually go into effect July 1st every year. What this is going to change is the parties can agree in writing to extend the 3-day right of rescission up to an additional 4 days. So I think we'll start to see that as standard practice. And we'll just have some standard language that we write in the additional terms that seller and buyer agree to extend the POA Act to an additional 4 days. And that'll give us 7 calendar days once we receive the POA packet to review it and have a right of rescission period. Now, this brings up just a professional standards recommendation I have for you. If you have a listing and you know it has a property owners association or a homeowners association, one of the first items you should be doing is trying to get a hold of that POA packet, because POAs are run by people. They're not, sometimes they're run by property management companies, but most of the time they're just run by the board that is in that neighborhood, living in that neighborhood. And it can sometimes be a little difficult to procure that POA packet. So the problem with that is if you get a buyer who is under contract with your sellers and it takes you 3 weeks to get the POA packet to them, they now have a termination or a right of rescission period right before closing. And I just don't like to leave my sellers vulnerable like that. So I try to provide the POA packet or the HOA packet as soon as humanly possible and just get that right of rescission period out of the way, and then we move on to closing. Does that make sense? And we got a question. Thanks, Jennifer.
Sorry. Kara, Ashley, could you make that verbiage for the, where are we?
Yes.
Bounced up again here. Can you Make the verbiage for POP extension in the drop-down list of zip forms.
And
POA extension.
yes, so
Yeah,
Kara,
rope pop.
Kara's bringing up that if you're on zip forms and you are typing in documents in there, anytime you go to a field where there's space for you to write in language, there's going to be a little piece of like Thomas Jefferson parchment paper right above it as a little icon. And if you click on that, and it'll default to global clauses. If you can switch over to broker clauses, those are clauses I've written and I have put into zip forms for you so that you don't have to try to remember how to phrase things. So if you click on that little parchment paper and go to broker clauses, there will be a section of clauses I've already written for the purchase agreement, and I will likely put it in there, Kara. So there will now be a clause titled POA extension, response time extension, or something like that. And when you click on that, it'll insert that language into wherever it is. Like if you click the parchment button on the additional terms section, it'll insert it right onto your purchase agreement into the additional terms section. Does that make sense?
And also Stevie is asking if you can put something in the contract that says that the seller will provide the POA packet within a certain time of remediation, that she's had people drag their feet nearly to the end to provide that.
You know, and I'm going to tell you, I didn't, but one of our agents had a buyer who had just horrendous cold feet about their condo they were buying. The whole time had cold feet about it. And we tried to work through the repairs, but the whole time I had told my buyer's agent, listen, as much as I don't like it, she's going to have that right of rescission period with the POA packet because they still haven't provided it. So when we never could get through the repairs acceptably, and in this case, you know, the buyer had some unrealistic expectations about what should be done on the property. Like she wanted a little dip going into the driveway. She wanted that completely dug up and I mean, we get these. It just happens. However, as icky as I felt about it, I knew we had that right of rescission period once the POA packet was delivered, and we exercised that right. And it was about 5 days prior to closing, and I felt like a heel. But it worked for our buyer. So as the listing agent, they could have protected their seller better by providing that up front, because that right of rescission period would have been gone. But I think you could write that in, but I don't know how they could honor it. You know, if the POA, what you could probably do is that they would request it. This is maybe what you said, that they will request it within, you know, 3 business days following ratification. I don't know how you can put a timeline on it getting provided, because there is no timeline legally for the property owners association to respond or get it to you, you know. But you could put in there that it will be requested by the seller within 3 business days or whatever you want to put on there. Yeah. However, if you're working for the buyer, you may want to keep that as a tool, right? You may not want to remind them. Typically, when I'm working with a buyer, I don't remind the listing agent because I want to keep that in my back pocket as a exit strategy if we need it. Any other questions on that? Okay. Are y'all convinced now that you could just name a topic and I could talk for 30 minutes on that topic? Just doesn't matter the topic.
We like it.
Okay, we're gonna move on to septic inspections. I think this one is gonna like blow everybody's mind. So this bill is going to be requiring anyone who's gonna perform a septic inspection in connection with the real estate transaction to hold a valid on-site sewage system operator, on-site sewage system installer, or on-site soil evaluator license. So that means they're going to have to be licensed. The septic inspectors are going to have to be licensed, presumably through the state. And that is different than what it is now. So you may remember that about 2 years ago, it became required for home inspectors to be licensed through DPOR, just like we're licensed through DPOR. We thought that was going to, like, you know, shake up the whole world, but it was fine. Everybody just got licensed, you know. I like that it standardized the process of being a home inspector. I like that, because just like us, there are expectations now on home inspectors set forth by the state. So the same will happen with septic inspectors as well. Any questions on that one? Okay. We've got about 15 minutes left. Who has a topic they'd like to talk about, or somebody has an issue they'd like to speak on, or any questions? Do y'all like having this weekly meeting? I would like to keep this. And even when we all get back to our regular lives, I may keep a 1 hour, morning meeting every week just to talk about what's come up in the past week. Does that sound like a good idea? Thumbs up? Okay. Who has a topic or a question or a situation they're going through? Anybody? Kara does right now.
Yes, I can touch on, I had an agent call this morning, and her question was about the impervious tax and how we are adding that into our taxes on the MLS, like property taxes. And my question was, what is that? And basically, it's the stormwater tax that everybody is supposed to be, like the municipalities are supposed to be charging, but a lot are not. But Roanoke City is one of those municipalities that are charging it. So her question was, when you add your real estate tax on the MLS, are you including that amount? Because it is a separate amount. And her question,
no one is doing that. Should we?
Right. Well, okay, that was her question, because she's looking at it as a standpoint of when it comes time to pay that, there's not going to be enough money in escrow. They're going to have a huge spike in their payment amount. It could affect qualifying. Like, she was just wanting some concrete guidance on whether or not we should be adding that together with the real estate tax or not.
So it is a tax, and it is tied to the property. So I would interpret it as a property tax. Obviously, it is not in every municipality. And I would guarantee you no one is adding that in. I think they should be. But it's just not something that agents are doing. I certainly don't mind taking that back to the board of directors and saying, hey, what are our thoughts on this? How should this be handled? Should we have another line in the MLS for that? Or should we have some sort of indicator that we should be adding that? I have never included it, honestly, and it would end up being like a surprise tax, right?
And honestly, I guess it's been a while since I have done one in Roanoke City. I'm usually a county girl. So I pulled up her property because she lives in the city, because that's what we were talking about. And she said hers, basically what it is if you have a hard surface, so a paved driveway, a concrete patio, anything that the rainwater can hit and bounce off to cause runoff, that's what this tax is supposedly for.
And they're calculating, are they calculating it per square foot?
The area of that hard surface. So she has an extremely long driveway, she said, and hers started out at $200, and then the next year it went to $300, and now it's $400 extra. So they're gradually increasing it, she said, to get it to the point where it needs to be. But that could potentially be a big difference in somebody's payment.
That's right.
So that's why she was questioning that. So
no, that's an excellent question. Would you humor me? And let me make a note. Let's I'll email the board of directors and just ask them if that's something we want to put on our next agenda, and figure out how we want to handle that. There are, things do differ from municipality to municipality. Inflow and infiltration is a Western Virginia Water Authority inspection. It's not ever going to be applicable for the city of Salem. City of Salem has their own water department. So, and I got an offer last year on one of my Salem properties, and of course they checked the box for inflow and infiltration, and I had to say, well, actually we don't have to do that because it's not Western Virginia Water Authority here. Same with certain areas at Smith Mountain Lake, or anywhere in the county or the city where they have a septic system. Then inflow and infiltration inspection is not a standard inspection for that property, because that one is for making sure runoff from the gutters and the downspouts and the basement drain are not going into the stormwater, because they don't want to clean that water. So things do differ from municipality to municipality. And this is one where it would only impact Roanoke City. Yeah.
She's not sure about the other counties. This is the only one that she knows is doing it.
Right. Don't worry, they'll find out about it and then they'll start doing it. Because
I know. She said she researched it and they're supposed to be doing it, but some aren't. So
right.
It was interesting.
Well,
I have a question.
Yes, please, Kathy.
Did you just review the procedures to withdraw a listing?
Sure.
The buyer and seller, I mean, the sellers agree and have sent an email. Is there a form or anything I need to complete for when?
There is a form. So if you have an email from both of them, from both of their email addresses asking you to withdraw it, that is legally fine. However, we do have a form. So if you go to Zip Forms, you can toggle from the Roanoke Valley Association of Realtors to Wainwright Forms. And if you go to Wainwright Forms, we actually have a withdrawal or termination form in there. And you sign it and the sellers sign it.
Okay.
And that would formally withdraw it.
Okay.
I had an interesting question last night from an agent. She's new to our firm. She transferred in, and her question was, I'm getting ready to list some land, and it's a husband and it's a divorcing couple and their daughter who own the property. The daughter and the mother have both signed the listing agreement, but it's going to be a few days till the father can sign it. And she was asking me, I can't put that on the MLS yet, right? And the answer is no, because the father has not signed and agreed to list the property, right? Even if he sent it an email saying, sure, list it, that is not good enough because he has not agreed to all the terms in that listing agreement. So for it to be a legally, basically what I said was, you do not have a legally binding listing agreement because all parties have not signed it. That seems obvious. But when we hear these stories like, oh, well, he's visiting with his mom and he won't be back for 2 days, and he doesn't, it's very easy to see how you want to get it on the market for the weekend. And you start to think maybe that'd be okay. But you just have to keep reminding yourself, do I have a legally binding document? And you don't until all parties have signed it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions? We just got a couple of minutes left. This morning, I wondered, how am I going to talk about the new laws for an hour? And I should never worry about that with myself, ever. Okay. Well, you guys have a fabulous day, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.